Welcome in to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, a DFS edition, talking NFL Week 17. I am not Scott Genstad. I am Nick Whalen, standing in for Scott. Joined today, as always, by Ryan Belongia. Ryan, kind of stepped in on short notice here. I'm looking forward to it. I've been a longtime listener of the RotoWire DFS pod. You guys have helped me playing on DraftKings a ton this season, and it's an honor to be here with you.
Yeah, really appreciate you stepping in. Scott, busy with work. Adam, apparently his internet connection's not good. But, we're happy to have you here. I know you play quite a bit of DFS and, NFL stuff, so it should be a pretty seamless transition. I'm excited to break the slate down with you. It's different in that we have 13 games, and a lot of the slates recently have had 9 or 10. There just feels like a lot of options, especially because we have like a lot of cheap quarterbacks in play now with some of the injuries and other stuff, and some cheap running backs because of injuries. It's difficult to know where to go. I'm kind of struggling to narrow down what I want to do.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the quarterbacks. That's where I wanted to start. And obviously this is not a new issue for us this season, right? I mean, we've basically been averaging like 13 to 15 backup quarterbacks per week. And this week, more than ever, it feels like you have decisions to make. If you're still alive, in a season-long fantasy league, I've been getting peppered with questions on Twitter all week of like, do I start Jake Browning? Do I go Mason Rudolph? Do I plug Joe Flacco in there on Thursday night? Hopefully you started Joe Flacco based on what we saw on Thursday Night Football. But it's so hard to me to decide between these 8 or 9 guys who have various levels of experience, various levels of exposure, different matchups. I mean, how have you found yourself, handling that when it comes to DFS? Do you go cheap at quarterback when there are so many options, or do you look at that group and say, I just don't know if I trust it?
Yeah, more so the latter, but it hasn't necessarily been working out. Normally, at least for cash games, I try to spend up at quarterback. It's been a strategy that's worked over the years. So, I try to play Hurts or Josh Allen or whoever it is, but cheap quarterbacks have sort of been the way this season. I know it's obviously a small sample, but it at least shows that it's viable. Like this slate is tough because Hurts is in a great spot. He projects the best. He'll be relatively popular. You can play him because there's cheap value at running back. There aren't really, must-have receivers that are expensive. So you can play Hurts, but we have 4K quarterbacks this week. Like Brissett is 4.9K, and the Giants quarterback Tyrod Taylor. All right, Tyrod Taylor back in our lives, 4,600, and both those guys run a bit, and they're in spots where they should be throwing like most of the game, so they project well. That's a lot of salary savings if you go down to those guys. I'm considering spending down to. Like you said, though, who do you click on and who do you pair them with? Do you pair them with anybody? That's tough,
That's exactly the thing for me is I love the idea of plugging a $4,600 quarterback into my lineup on DK. And, we saw Jacoby Brissett a couple of weeks ago in garbage time, immediately put up 2 touchdowns on the Rams defense. It's pretty easy to imagine Tyrod Taylor doing something similar, even if the Giants fall behind early. But like you said, it's not like you want to create a giant stack here. It's like which receiver or which tight end do you go with? I think you could ask the same question for Jacoby Brissett in Washington. I think the Commanders, I don't know what they're doing as a team. I don't know if it really makes sense. Like you had to come out of the season knowing one way or the other if Sam Howell's the guy, and I don't really understand benching him at this point in the year. You have nothing to play for. It's one thing midway through the season when they were hovering around 500. If you want to try to salvage a run at a wild card spot, sure, throw Jacoby Brissett in there. You're probably going to be a better team with Jacoby Brissett. But at this point in the season, I don't really understand that decision. I think you should want as much of an evaluation period on Howell as you could possibly get.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, unless they're sure that they've already moved on from him,
Right.
I just don't understand putting Brissett in. But you look at his numbers, he's been pretty good the last 2 games when he's came in. I mean, 10 of 13 and 8 of 10 with 3 touchdowns, no picks. Right. He's going to run a little bit. Like, I get it. I think it's a tough question for cash games.
Yeah, it really is. So, you mentioned some of the expensive quarterbacks. Obviously, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, they're going to be at the top of the board. You got Lamar as an option at home against Miami. Mahomes is still up there at 7,500. KC welcoming in the Cincinnati Bengals this week. I don't know if I'll go in that direction. Do you have a favorite of that top group? I know on our site, we project Jalen Hurts to be the highest owned quarterback this week. And that makes sense against an Arizona team that has basically been neck and neck with the Commanders, vying for the title of the worst defense in the NFL over the second half of the season.
Yeah, the spot for Hurts is, arguably as good as it gets. You mentioned the Cardinals defense. They might be the worst in the league. They're definitely the worst at getting pressure on the quarterback. They have 1 sack in the last 4 weeks. I mean, Hurts should have a clean pocket all game, be able to do whatever he wants. So for cash games, I mean, you're gonna play Hurts if you're spending up. He just projects the best, and he's going to be the most popular, so it makes sense. But for tournaments, yeah, I don't know. I think they're all interesting. No one's going to click Josh Allen, and that makes him interesting. I kind of like Lamar, just how good he's looked. They're sort of in the marquee game of the week. He's entered the MVP conversation now, and no one's really going to play him either. And yeah, then you have Mahomes. Yeah, I'm not sure what to do with the Chiefs, but it's a good spot if somebody, if anybody wants to stack them, because I think a lot of people are down on KC. And, I was actually considering it, but it's tough to play someone on the Cincinnati side if Chase is back, not that you necessarily need to. I thought it was interesting because I haven't really played Kelsey at all this season, and it's worked out, but now he's down to 7K, the pretty significant drop in salary.
Yeah.
And I still don't think too many people really want to click him. So I think he's interesting, but I'd maybe be more likely to just one-off him and not necessarily include Mahomes. I mean, yeah, he can put up a ceiling in this spot, though, since his defense hasn't been great either.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't have a strong lean at the moment. I'm open to playing Hurts, too, because, this being a 13-game slate, the Eagles aren't going to be very popular either. And it's a great spot for them. I don't know. Did you have a lean up top, or like any of these guys really jump out for you?
If I'm going north of 7K or even north of 7.5, I think I'm willing to pay the extra 700-800 and go with Hurts or go with Lamar at 77. Like Mahomes, to me, he hasn't shown that kind of ceiling that you're looking for in a tournament since like week 4, when he had like a 35 fantasy point game. It's just not there, man. The Chiefs offense, we've all watched it for 7 or 8 weeks now. And it's pretty clear to me that there's not going to be a 1 week fix, right? I mean, the problems that they've been displaying for half of the season. And, when this first started cropping up and looked like a real issue around week 8, week 9, you're thinking, all right, by the time we get to week 17, by the time we're on the doorstep of the playoffs, they'll probably have figured it out. It's Mahomes, it's Andy Reid, it's the Chiefs. And to me, it's gotten worse. It's not only drops now. Like that was really the kind of the lazy narrative, I think, to point to early on. It was like, oh man, if Kadarius Toney could just catch the ball, they'd be fine. I mean, they look out of sorts. They look confused. They can't pick up their downs. The one silver lining for me in all this has been the development of Rashee Rice. Like he looks like he's going to be a big time piece for them going forward. He's been so consistent over these last few weeks. So you mentioned Kelsey. I think with his price this week, I'm fine with that. I'm also fine plugging Rashee Rice into my lineup, but as you alluded to, I don't really feel obligated to pair them with Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, I agree. I think Rice will be one of the more popular receivers this week. People have been playing him for the last couple weeks now, and it's worked out. He didn't quite get there last week, but he had 12 targets. Yeah, you said it, though. The offense looked out of sorts. They looked really bad last week against the Raiders. Like, just no structure. It looks like just a playground offense, basically. Just Mahomes drop back and try to make a play. And, yeah, it's not working out. It's interesting because Edwards-Helaire might end up being one of the most popular players on the slate.
I think you're right. I mean, we should say for the live listeners, I mean, as of right now, it doesn't look like Pacheco is going to play. He's not practiced all week. They haven't ruled him out, but it seems like we're trending toward another absence for him, which I believe would be his third in the last 4 weeks.
Yeah. So, I don't mean to jump around, but I think he would be very popular, and then Rice will also be pretty popular. So it kind of, I don't know, takes me off, I guess, of stacking the Chiefs in tournaments if those guys are already going to be popular.
What about the other side of that Philly matchup? Because I think there's a lot to like about Jalen Hurts, but if you look at fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position, just a basic stat you could find over on our defense versus position page on RotoWire. The Eagles are 30th right now. I mean, they're basically allowing the same number of fantasy points to quarterbacks as they're scoring on the year. Is there a case for Kyler Murray? I know he's been on the injury report. He's dealing with an illness, not an actual injury. You would think come Sunday he'll be fine. Obviously we expect the Eagles to win this game. They're double-digit favorites, and rightfully so. But we've seen the Cardinals hang around in these spots, even though they continue to lose games. I mean, they put up production. Obviously, since Kyler Murray's come back, they've looked like a more consistent and more dangerous offense. Is there a case for Kyler this week?
Yeah, I do think there's a case for Kyler. There's certainly a case for some of his pass catchers, specifically McBride.
Right.
Like you said, the Eagles have been one of the best teams to pass against, and one of the best teams for teams to put up stats against. So out of all these top teams or top quarterbacks, I guess you feel like Arizona is most likely to be able to push the Eagles into at least some sort of back and forth game where these guys can pay off their salaries. And I thought McBride was interesting because he's been chalk for about 2 months straight, and for the most part smashing, but kind of a down week last week and priced up again this week. And while he'll still be relatively popular, we're not going to see his ownership get quite as out of hand as it has been in recent weeks. And the Eagles are notoriously bad against tight ends. So yeah, I do like Eagle stacks more for that reason, because I think you can run it back with McBride or maybe one of the cheap pass catchers if we get Hollywood Brown, or the cheap wide receivers if we get Hollywood Brown out again. I think back to Kyler, I think you could go to Kyler, but there's more options on this slate than normal. Like if it was a different slate, I'd be more okay with it, but there's like a lot of cheap guys if I'm going to go cheap. And like, if I'm in that Kyler range, I might just try to get up to 7K.
Yeah.
Like I kind of have some interest in Stroud and Purdy.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And, the Marquise Brown thing worries me as well. Like if he's out, that opens up some cheap receivers for Arizona, but I think maybe that lowers the ceiling for Kyler Murray as well. And, I think there's a chance that this is a relatively close game. I think Arizona has remained extremely frisky despite having a terrible defense. They found a way to kind of challenge some teams. I thought they played San Francisco about as well as they possibly could have a few weeks ago, given the talent gap between those two teams, and especially given the health gap with some of the injuries for Arizona. And, Philly, they've been big favorites several times this season. They have not covered a number bigger than 5.5 on the year. Every time they've been favored by at least 6, they failed to cover. Those games came against Washington twice, the Giants, Minnesota, and the Jets. So they're a team that in some ways tends to play down to their competition, at least on the defensive end. You mentioned Brock Purdy. I think he's going to be really popular. I think this is kind of an obvious bounce back spot for him, a great matchup. Even though they're on the road, you got to go cross country to Washington. Like we said earlier, Arizona and Washington, those are the two teams to me, maybe along with Detroit right now, who you want to target in DFS. Niners are 12.5-point favorites. I do love this spot for Christian McCaffrey. I love pretty much every spot for CMC at this point. It's tough to go against him. Obviously, you have to pay up, but I'm totally fine going Purdy this week, even though he's going to be popular. And like you said, on a 13-game slate, how much do you really worry about ownership percentages in a tournament?
Well, pretty much not at all at quarterback. It just it just doesn't matter. So you just kind of go with the guy you like best. Yeah, that's a good point. At quarterback, it just doesn't make sense to worry about it too much because nobody's ownership gets out of hand. And you want the best play who's going to score the most points. You end up being able to get different at any of the other positions. So yeah, I think Purdy's a good play and he'll be popular too. I'd be fine going there. For tournaments, I always find it tough to stack the Niners just because you never know which one of their guys to pick. Kind of like Ayuk. I mean, just because he's cheaper than Debo, and the second half of that game against the Ravens, he looked pretty good. Kittle too projects well as one of the better tight ends on the board. Not that expensive. You could see him paying off his salary. He had big game last week, 10 targets. Yeah, I like the Niners.
Yeah, I think I'd play Kittle over Evan Ingram, who's slightly higher than him in price this week. And we'll dive in a little bit further on the tight end pool as we get later in the episode. We will talk about some of the individual games in a moment, but we got some messages to pass along from our wonderful sponsors. First and foremost, Circa. Get ready for the ultimate big game parties at Circa Resort and Casino. Super Sunday is in Las Vegas this year. You can watch the big game poolside at Stadium Swim's big game viewing party. Massive screen, booming game sound, and a view of the pyrotechnic and visual effects throughout the game. Snag the best seat in the sun with day beds, poolside boxes, cabanas, and more. Or touchdown at the world's largest sports book, Circa Sports, for the big game bash. We're talking 3 stories of football glory featuring a 78 million pixel screen. Book your seat with a variety of reservation options, including bottle service, open bar, stadium-style food, and more. Don't miss these legendary viewing experiences on February 11th. The big game parties only at Circa Resort and Casino. Reserve today at circalasvegas.com. We're also brought to you by Odds Are. Are you ready to revolutionize your sports betting approach? Begin with a 2-week free trial at oddsr.com. That's ODDSR.com, where cutting-edge AI technology sharpens your edge in the betting game. Benefit from our proven 2-year track record, boasting a 60% accuracy rate and an impressive 10% ROI. The Odds Are AI meticulously sifts through extensive data to reveal high-value, green value plays, guiding you towards smarter betting decisions. And it's not just about the numbers. The Odds Are app is exceptionally user-friendly, and it's crafted to be your go-to betting advisor right at your fingertips. Jumpstart your journey to betting smarter and more successfully this season. Simply visit the iOS or Google Play Store, download the Odds Are app, and step into a world of confident betting. Your path to a more strategic betting experience starts with our 2-week free trial. Download today, where smart strategy triumphs over luck. That's Odds Are, ODDSR. All right, Ryan, let's get into some of the individual games we're keeping an eye on. We got Detroit and Dallas on Saturday. That's a standalone game. We will put that one aside for now. Should be a fun one if you're playing showdown contests, though. That is our highest total of the week at 52. We do have relatively high totals across the board. Speaking in 2023 NFL terms, I'm seeing only 3 games on the Sunday slate sitting under 40, which is a rarity this season, as you know. But let's go to Dolphins-Ravens. We already talked about the quarterbacks on each side of this matchup. Our total's at 47. Ravens, they've kind of been bouncing back and forth between 3.5 point favorites at home. Outside of Lamar, outside of Tua, is there any specific players, any specific positions you like in this matchup?
Yeah, I don't think I would have if Waddle was healthy, I guess. But, we got the news that Waddle's going to be out, and I just think it opens up an easier path for Tyreek to hit a ceiling. His ownership's not going to be out of hand at all this week. I don't think Miami is going to be able to control the game on the ground like they have many times this season. And, that's kind of been their goal to slow it down and run the ball. Baltimore sped it up last week. They were actually first in pace last week, and they've been throwing at a high clip too. So I think there's some scenarios where that game could shoot out. If the Dolphins offense can keep pace, the Ravens are a tough matchup.
Right.
But I think it makes sense to take a chance on that game in tournaments. It's probably one of the most likely games to shoot out just because it's got a closer spread than these other high total games. So yeah, I have some interest in Tyreek and maybe even like a Cedric Wilson for 3,600 filling in for Waddle. And then on the Ravens side, I think Zay Flowers looks like one of the better options under 6K. He had a big game against San Fran last week, 13 targets, and kind of, emerged as Lamar's go-to guy since Mark Andrews has been out. So yeah, I think there's some good options in that game. What about you?
Yeah, I like Flowers. We should mention he did not practice on Thursday. He's been nursing a calf injury, but I think the general indication is that he will likely play. I mean, we have a bunch of injuries on the Miami side of things outside of Jalen Waddle. They're still being careful with Tyreek. Tua has been on the injury report all week. I think he's going to be fine, but both Mostert and Achane are banged up as well. So I lean more toward the Baltimore side of this game. I think it could be an obvious letdown spot for the Ravens. They just played their game of the year out on the West Coast, but I think you can make the same case for Miami. They're coming off of a huge game in their own right against Dallas. So to me, maybe that cancels out. Isaiah Likely is somebody that if you want to spend down a little bit at tight end, I don't mind going in that direction. He's not Mark Andrews, but I think he's done a pretty reasonable Andrews impression over these last few weeks. I mean, he's been targeted 17 times over the last 3 games. He's turned in pretty respectable totals, and at 4,600, I think that's probably the number one target for me on the Baltimore side. But do you have any interest in these non-Keaton Mitchell running backs for the Ravens?
I don't think so. I guess no. There's just, I get it with Gus Edwards just because nobody ever plays him.
Right.
But there's kind of a lot. There's other cheap value that I'm more interested in around that salary range. I don't know. Would you click on any of those Ravens running backs?
Probably not. Probably not against Miami. I mean, they've been good against running backs and receivers. Neither of these teams are defenses that you necessarily want to target. I mean, the Dolphins are top 5 in the NFL in terms of average fantasy points allowed to the running back position. So, no, probably not. I mean, it's tough because I see this being a relatively high scoring game. It's just kind of pinpointing where exactly those points come from. And if you're playing Gus Edwards, you're basically counting on him, running in like 2 4-yard touchdowns, right? Like that's kind of what I picture a successful DFS day for Gus Edwards. So no, I think, like you said, there are probably some better, higher upside, cheaper options in that range. How about Pat's Bills? I don't know if I like a whole lot here. The Stephon Diggs decline over the second half of the season has been, I think, one of the more undercovered stories in all of fantasy. Obviously it's killed you in season long. It's been really frustrating in DFS. He's still near the top of the board in pricing. He's the 3rd highest priced receiver on the main slate on Sunday at 8,200. There's always that promise of, man, maybe this is the week. Maybe this is the week they get him more involved. But we've also seen a much lower volume passing attack from the Bills over the last few weeks.
Yeah, you said it. I just can't click Diggs. He hasn't had over 100 receiving yards since week 6, I believe. He's been under 10 fantasy points in 5 of the last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like a spot where the Bills are going to need to chuck it around a lot, like you mentioned. I think they just want to rely on James Cook. Also, Allen spreads it around more. We saw Diggs getting a bunch of targets early in the season, but now they have both Kincaid and Knox healthy, Gabe Davis and other guys. Yeah, what makes Buffalo somewhat appealing is that nobody's going to play Allen or Diggs. So I mean, if you're like a true game theory player, I guess you could click on him for that reason. But yeah, the ceiling games just seem few and far between, especially in a matchup like this.
Yeah, I don't love the spot for the Buffalo offense. I think New England could cover this 13-point spread. Kind of spooked a little bit by what we saw for Buffalo against the bad Chargers team last week. I don't think the Bills are in any danger of losing this game, but I think it could be ugly. I don't think they've completely solved all of their issues on the offensive end. Do you expect Zeke Elliott to be pretty highly owned this weekend?
Yeah, I do. I was just going to ask you if you're in on this Zeke Elliott chalk, or I wouldn't say chalk. He won't be chalky if we get both Edwards-Helaire and Zamir White,
right.
But he'll still be relatively popular for that range. Yeah. I don't know. You're relying so much on him catching a lot of passes, but he sure has been lately. So, I don't know. My lean is to not play a relatively popular Elliott in this spot where they're double-digit underdogs in a pretty tough matchup. What do you think?
I'm not opposed to it, but like you said, you're relying so much on high-volume receiving numbers. And, the targets have been there. The catches have been there. He had 9 receptions against Denver the other night. I don't know if that's sustainable. I think I would, if I'm looking in that range, I would probably default to James Conner, who's a little bit cheaper. I like him in that matchup against Philly. We talked about it. I think there's going to be points on the board there. Maybe you go down to someone like Devin Singletary at 5,600. Even Jalen Warren, I think, is in a good spot. Pittsburgh's on the road at Seattle. That could be a relatively low-scoring game, but Seahawks have been hemorrhaging rushing yards of late, and Najee Harris has been banged up this week. So I think I would rather save a couple hundred and go with any of those options.
Yeah, me too. I think Connor specifically is interesting, especially if you're stacking the Eagles, because no one's really going to play Connor. He'd be a nice leverage option.
Falcons Bears in Chicago. This is a low total game. One of our lowest totals on the Sunday main slate. It is sitting at 38. Conditions in Chicago should be all right. I think the temperature is going to be hanging around 32. It's going to be windy, but we're not looking at precipitation. I usually just throw my hands up when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons. I pick every game against the spread for an article I do on RotoWire each week, and I think I'm like 3-12 picking Falcons games. I cannot figure this team out. Every time I think they're going to show up, they don't. Every time I think they're going to get beat, they have a game like last week against Indy, and Chicago's been equally confounding, right? And the Bears defense has been one of the best units in the NFL really since their bye midway through the season. They've been top 3 in terms of defensive EPA. They've been fantastic against the run. So I like Justin Fields. I think this should be a good spot for him. I'm not sure I like anything else in this game. I don't think this is a good spot for Atlanta to do a whole lot on the ground. And the Bears, could be without Cole Kmet as well. So, if you're going like dumpster diving at tight end, is there any case for Robert Tonyan, who had like one of the biggest drops of the year a couple of weeks ago? I'm trying to erase that from my memory. But other than that, I don't love this game.
Yeah, no, I pretty much agree with everything you said. I didn't see that about Kmet might miss. Former Packer great Robert Tonyan.
I loved Tonyan when he was on the Packers, by the way.
Yeah.
Before the ACL, I thought he was going to be a real guy.
Me too. Just in general, I was kind of cross this game off. Like you said, aside from DFS, I kind of like the Bears. You mentioned their defense has been great recently. Yeah. Montez Sweat has been elite since arriving. Jalen Johnson, one of the best corners in the league. I think Fields has been playing much better. Fields for DFS is always okay when nobody's going to play him just because he has the rushing upside,
Right.
But the Falcons haven't been allowing many ceiling games. Like I don't have the stat here, but I think it's been like 5 straight games since holding quarterbacks under 200 passing yards. I know they haven't allowed a touchdown to a running back. I don't think this season either, unless they did last week. At least that was going into last week. Just a crazy stat.
That's insane.
A rushing touchdown to a running back.
Wow.
But still, I mean, we've played almost the whole season. Anyway, I don't really have interest in that game. There's some of these other middling total games I like better.
Maybe Titans-Texans is one of those, Ryan. Totals at 44 there. Texans are 4-point favorites at home. I don't mind going back to CJ Stroud. Maybe you have that memory of the last time we saw him, just getting completely shut down by the New York Jets. But at the same time, we have a much larger sample of CJ Stroud being one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL this season. They'll have Nico Collins back at full strength. They'll have Dalton Schultz back in the mix as well. Obviously this offense feels like it's lost some upside without Tank Dell. And it's not often you can say that about like a 5'9", 165-pound receiver making that big of a difference for an offense, but I really think he does. This is a very tough game to evaluate because we saw these teams a couple of weeks ago in Nashville. It was ugly. It was low scoring. It was about exactly what you'd expect in a Will Levis versus Case Keenum showdown, but huge game for Houston as they still try to hang around in the AFC South. I think, they've not quite been able to capitalize on the Jaguars slide, but I think that Jag slide could continue over these next couple of weeks. So this is a big one for Houston. That's the side of this game that I would be targeting. I don't have a whole lot of interest in Tennessee. I'm still scarred by, one of the all-time inefficient games in NFL history that we saw from Derrick Henry a couple of weeks ago.
Oh man, I played Derrick Henry that week. Yeah, that was tough. But yeah, no, I have interest in Stroud. He's won people a lot of money this year on slates where no one's really going to play him, kind of like this one. Yeah. The Titans have a pass funnel defense that's been conceding points to quarterbacks and their pass catchers. Dalton Schultz is one of my favorite tight ends on the board this week. I think he's kind of inexplicably cheaper than he has been recently, and for no apparent reason. Other than Stroud being out, but still had 8 catches on 11 targets last week. I mean, he had gotten up to 5,400 just a few weeks ago. And with Tank Dell out, you'd figure that his usage will be higher. I have some interest in Nico Collins too. He's a guy you could see having a ceiling game in this spot. Yeah, the Titans side is tough. Like, do you run it back with anyone if you're going to stack it in tournaments? I mean, Hopkins is always an option.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not in love with it. Sometimes I try to talk myself into taking a chance on Treylon Burks. He's really cheap. I love him as a player, but I'm just not sure that the targets are going to be there. I don't know.
I think if you're going Stroud, you need at least one of Schultz or Collins, if not both, in your lineup, which is fine. I'm good with both of those guys. I mean, like you said, Schultz at 4,300 is pretty appealing. I know a lot of the rostership, projections think Okonkwo is going to be pretty highly owned this week. He's down at 3,600. Houston, that's been one of the Achilles heels for this defense, is they do give up a ton of fantasy production to tight ends. Hopkins had a terrible game, a couple of weeks ago in this matchup. Saw a lot of Derek Stingley, who's been playing really, really well over the last few weeks. So I get the upside with DeAndre Hopkins. I think there's quite a bit of downside there as well for the price you're paying. But do you have interest in Okonkwo at 3,600?
I guess the short answer would be no, because I'm going to play Schultz if I'm going to play this game. But just like in a vacuum, Okonkwo on his own, yeah, he seems like a decent option. He'll be relatively popular. Yeah, I don't know. Like Gerald Everett for the same price has eight targets in 3 straight games, and I see him like maybe getting some ownership too if you get Keenan Allen and who I believe is going to be out. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the short answer is no, but I guess I get it. You mentioned it's a pretty good spot against the Houston team who's been allowing a lot to tight ends especially.
Raiders-Colts is an interesting one in the AFC. Both of these teams still clinging to wild card hopes and really divisional hopes, mathematically speaking. I think the Raiders will still need some serious help from the Kansas City Chiefs to make that happen. But Colts are in pole position if the Jacksonville Jaguars were to slip up over these last 2 weeks. Our total is 42.5 in Indy. Colts should get Michael Pittman back this week. This has been such a difficult team for me to evaluate. They're in the same basket for me as the Atlanta Falcons. Like you have no idea what you're getting from the Colts week to week. And that's the Gardner Minshew experience, right? Early in the season, they were the only team, I think, through week 9 that had scored at least 20 points in every game. And then, of course, they go into that New England game overseas and put up 10. Since then, they've beaten a good Buccaneers team. That win looks better in retrospect. They played a shootout against the Tennessee Titans, which nobody does because the Titans don't play shootouts. They were blown out by the Bengals. They blew out the Steelers, and then they were blown out by the Atlanta Falcons. Like I don't know what to make of that sample.
Yeah, they're a tough team to get right, but in general, I really like games at Lucas Oil indoors. The Colts play fast. Their defense isn't that great. I have quite a bit of interest in Pittman this week. He's been the one guy you could count on, at least when he's in there. I mean, he's absolutely crushing before the injury. I mean, like, I shouldn't say surprised, but I wouldn't have been surprised if he was projected to be more popular than this week. But again, you have 13 games and coming off injury and priced up now, just there's a lot of options in that 7K range. So no one's really going to be that popular. But yeah, I could see Pittman smashing in this spot. And I think it would make a lot of sense if you plan on playing Zamir White. I don't know if I can get to any of the quarterbacks in this game, but I think some pieces are okay.
Yeah, I don't think I'm building a Colts stack. I'm certainly not building a Raiders stack. I mean, this is another tough team to evaluate. They've won with defense for the most part. The Chargers game to me, I think putting up 63 one week and putting up 0 the previous week, those almost cancel out. And obviously last week, all their scoring came via field goals and 2 defensive touchdowns. I mean, Aiden O'Connell had literally 0 passing yards over the final 3 quarters. So I'm not touching him, even in what should be a good matchup against the Colts. And like you said, these home games for the Colts, they've scored at least 20 in every home game this season. And they've had a couple of boom games where they've been in the 30s and the mid to high 20s as well. So I like the Colts side of this game more than I do the Raiders. And yeah, I think Pittman is the guy you lean toward. We have him projected as the 6th most popular receiver this week. I always find myself, trying to squeeze like Alec Pierce or Josh Downs into a lineup, and it always seems to be the wrong week. But those have been, some of my favorite bargain bin receivers if you're just looking for a cheap option week to week. Although, again, this Raiders defense, I think, to me, I still think of them as like, oh, they're not this good team. They have, about as little recognizable talent on defense other than Max Crosby as any team in the NFL. And yet, since Antonio Pierce has taken over, this has been a completely different unit. So I no longer necessarily view Vegas as a team that you can exploit on that end.
Yeah, I think you're right. They're clearly a different team with Pierce as the coach. Pittman is really the guy who I have most interest in here.
All right, we will touch on Panthers-Jags in a moment, but first we got a message from our friends at Smash Up Fantasy Sports. Are you one of many sports fans who are not ready for the fantasy season to end? Then you have to play Smash Up Fantasy Sports, the fastest growing free game. In Smash Up, your traditional fantasy team gets supercharged by Smash Cards, which are like video game power-ups that you pick up to boost the scores of your players or even your entire team. Think your kicker's going to have a big game? Then choose a card like the Big Kick Energy to power them up. Are you starting Justin Fields? Then play Scramble Spikes to score more from his running. Paired with cool video game-like visuals, Smash Up is the biggest innovation in fantasy sports in a very long time, and it really feels like it was designed for sports fans. And here's the best part. You can play for free and win prizes, no credit card required, and there are no hidden fees. All users receive 3 entries per week, but with our code RotoWire, you'll unlock a 4th entry every week through the Super Bowl. And if you use our promo code or join the group RotoWire from your profile, you can play against us in our private tournaments for a chance to win a free RotoWire fantasy football subscription. Enter now at smashupsports.com and join the future of fantasy sports. All right, Ryan, Panthers-Jags in Jacksonville, another low total game. This one's down at 38. We are, of course, awaiting news on Trevor Lawrence. That will likely swing this game one way or the other. He has not practiced at all this week. The shoulder is now the latest injury for Trevor Lawrence. I will tell you, Ryan, you and I are both Wisconsinites. I'm sitting here in Milwaukee. I'm actually a Jaguars fan. I don't know if I've actually disclosed that to you. So I still keep an eye on the Packers, go to some games every year. I like the Packers as a secondary team, but I am Jags first and foremost. And I'm in full on panic mode about this game. It's been a month-long free fall for Jacksonville. And, if Lawrence is out there, you still feel pretty good about the Jags winning this game. I don't feel good about them covering. I'll tell you that. If it's CJ Beathard, I think Carolina can win this game straight up.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's been a tough run for the Jags. You would like to like them in this spot a little bit if Lawrence plays, and he hasn't been very good. And also Carolina just hasn't been a great spot. I kind of got fooled into playing quarterbacks and receivers against Carolina earlier in the season, and their offense is so bad, and there's just they don't get there that often. Their games aren't back and forth. They don't produce a lot of plays and not even a lot of points a lot of times. I don't know. So I've been more recently avoiding these spots against the Panthers. I guess I think Zay Jones would be interesting if he plays, just because he's 4K and he may go a little bit overlooked, but I'd expect a ton of targets without Christian Kirk there. I mean, he has 14 and 8 in his last 2, and we've seen it before. Last season without Ridley, this season without Kirk, and there's not a lot of cheap wide receivers that I love this week, or at least ones that aren't going to be that popular. So I don't know. I think that'd be okay. Don't really have interest from the Carolina side. I guess you could punt Mingo. He had 1 target last week, though. I mean, Bryce Young doesn't inspire too much confidence. I don't know. I'd expect the Jags to win if Lawrence plays, but if Lawrence doesn't play, you could punt the Panthers defense if you wanted to against Beathard. I don't know. What do you think? He, as a Jags fan, I know you said you don't have a lot of confidence, but for DFS, if Lawrence plays, would you have any interest in Ridley, Jones, or Ingram?
So I want to say right away that Trevor Lawrence has taken a lot of heat, and in some ways rightfully so. I don't think he's the reason for their struggles at all. If you watch these games, yes, he's still mistake prone, he's still turnover prone, and he's gonna have to figure that out. But people who are saying, oh, they're better off with CJ Beathard than a banged up Lawrence, they are not. I can assure you of that. CJ Beathard is not good. This is a completely different team if they're going to a backup quarterback. And the biggest problem to me right now is the Jags are the worst run blocking team in the NFL. They cannot run the ball on anybody, and I don't think that changes this week against Carolina. I mean, as bad as the Panthers have been, they've basically been a slightly below league average defense, which is really tough because your offense is constantly putting you in bad spots. And I think they've actually played about as well as they could on that side of the ball. I think this is kind of a bad matchup for the Jags. And until they prove that they can run the ball, like I've been completely ignoring Travis Etienne in DFS over the last couple of weeks. He had that great run in kind of the early middle portion of the season. For the most part, that's dried up. This could be another high volume spot for Etienne, especially if it's Beathard. I think you see a more conservative, just try to get in, win the game like 20-17 type of approach by the Jags. If it is Beathard, and I think that could be, 20 to 23 carries for Travis Etienne. So maybe he meets value just based on volume. But Carolina is sneakily number one in the NFL in terms of limiting receiving production to running backs. And that's, of course, part of the appeal with Travis Etienne. So that they're not necessarily great in terms of stopping the run, but I think that's canceled out by a terrible Jags offensive line, and they are great at limiting running backs catching the ball out of the backfield. So I don't love Etienne this week. I mean, if Zay Jones plays, sure. He's been limited all week. Missed last week against Tampa Bay. A couple of weeks ago, we saw him out there, and he was clearly limited, right? He was kind of dragging that right leg around. So I do worry about him not being 100%, but obviously they need him. Beyond him, we're talking Parker Washington, who's been up and down. Had a big fumble a couple of weeks ago that swung that game. Jamal Agnew is just, he's kind of Rashid Shaheed light. You're just hoping for like 165-yard touchdown. I don't mind Evan Ingram. I would rather play George Kittle at basically the same price. The Jags offense to me is just too fickle right now. The Carolina side of things, the Jags will put up a better fight on defense than Green Bay did. I think maybe some people will get tricked into thinking Bryce Young took a big step forward last week. No, that's just the Packers defense. They can't scheme against anybody. It was not surprising that Carolina had its best offensive output of the season against that defense. I would like Chuba Hubbard, but again, he's been limited throughout the week as well. So if Chuba Hubbard were to be ruled out, is there a kind of a punt case for someone like Miles Sanders, or are we kind of, as the ship sailed on him?
For 4.4K, I might be back in.
Yeah.
If there was no Hubbard, that's just really cheap for a guy who would probably catch a few passes too.
Yeah.
I wouldn't love it, but I would definitely consider it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just listening to everything you said, I'm not sure I have interest in this game anymore.
Yeah, the only other player I could make a case for, and this is you just kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel, looking for some upside, would be DJ Chark at 3,600. If you want to play the revenge narrative, obviously an ex-Jaguar, he had 8 targets last week against Green Bay. Again, that's an ideal matchup. That's one of the few defenses in the NFL that you want to target with a team like Carolina. But other than last week, he has 2 double-digit fantasy point games on DraftKings, and those were week 3 and week 5. So the chances of him replicating that are not great. But again, if you need somebody, in that Rondale Moore, Jonathan Mingo, Devontae Parker, Cedric Wilson zone, I think there could be a case for DJ Chark. But you can probably tell by my voice that I don't feel that strongly about it. Let's go to Rams-Giants. Total is 43. This game is in New York. Rams have been playing well lately. The Kyren Williams, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Matthew Stafford duo has been about as productive as it gets. And, for a while there, it felt like they were kind of trading off. Like Nacua would have a big game, then it would be Kupp. Kupp is banged up. But the fact that they've been able to get all 3 of those guys going now for 5 consecutive weeks, I really like what I'm seeing from the Rams. I think this should be a good matchup for them. What say you? Is there a case for Stafford? He's one of the quarterbacks who we have not really touched on, but I don't mind rolling him out there at 6,600.
No, I don't mind it either. Mostly because I don't think anybody's going to do it. And I don't think anybody's going to really play Kupp or Puka either. So it makes sense from that standpoint. It's tough if you're trying to run it back on the Giants side. Like, I'm not really going to play any of their pass catchers with Tyrod Taylor there. Saquon is cheap, and you can see his usage being great. It's a tough spot, though. The Rams have been really tough against opposing running backs, but Saquon, he's kind of got there in tough matchups all season. He's cheap enough where it seems okay, but yeah, I'm not sure this game's going to go back and forth enough for these Rams to pay off their salaries.
Yeah.
So I guess I probably won't get there. I'll say this about this game and the last game. Like, I'm not really considering them in the tournaments that I'm playing, which are mostly single entry stuff, some 3-max stuff. But if I was playing, the larger field tournaments like the Millie Maker or the $3.20 max or the $9, any of those smaller tournaments, then that's where I'll consider these guys a little bit more. Like back to the Jaguars, like Jaguars pass catchers too. But with 13 games to choose from and ownership not really getting out of hand, I'll probably just pick spots that I like a little bit better. I don't know. Is this Ram spot like better than I think it is?
Probably not, but I don't think it's a bad spot necessarily. Obviously, you'd prefer to play the Rams at home. You might prefer to play them in a dome setting, but the Giants have been, hemorrhaging points to receivers all season. And, you mentioned on the other side, like, I don't love Saquon this week. I mean, I kind of view him like ETN, where it's like, yeah, it could just be a high volume day for him and maybe he gets there, but the Rams have been so good, both limiting running backs on the ground and through the air. I mean, they're number 2 in yards per target allowed to running backs, but yeah, the Giants are what, 27th in the NFL in terms of fantasy points allowed to receivers. It's just you have to make that decision most likely between Nakua and Kupp, and you got to hope that you get it right. And some weeks both have paid off handsomely, and you end up being fine. But if you're playing Stafford at quarterback, you got to get one of those guys in there.
Yeah. Because Stafford's obviously he's not going to get there with his legs. Right. I think I'd be more likely to just one-off Kupp or Puka. Yeah. Then you don't need Stafford to put up a ceiling game. Especially if you're playing a cheap quarterback.
Yeah.
Especially if you're playing Tyrod Taylor. Then I think someone like Kupp makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. All right, Cardinals, Eagles. We talked about the quarterbacks in this matchup. Eagles 12-point favorites, high total at 48.5. I think there's a case for Hurts. There's a case for Kyler Murray. Talked about some of the pass catchers for each team. DeAndre Swift is somebody who jumped out to me. I think he'll be relatively popular this week, but again, on a 13-game slate, you don't worry too much about that. Arizona has been the worst defense against opposing running backs this season. You can get Swift at 6,500 this week. That's about the range that he's been hovering around. He was at 6K a week ago. He's got 38 carries over the last 2 weeks, Ryan. And, he hasn't been ripping off big runs. The efficiency hasn't been fantastic. But I think this is a good spot for him. And I think if Philly jumps out to an early lead, as the spread would imply, this could be, kind of a big run out the clock in the second half type of spot for DeAndre Swift. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's an ideal spot. I have a ton of interest in Swift. Basically everything you said, I highlighted him in my article. It's a quote unquote smash spot for Swift. You said it. The Cardinals have allowed more fantasy points to running backs than any team in the league, and the game script could favor him. He got 20 carries last week. If he gets 20 carries this week, the Cardinals haven't been able to stop anybody. So, he's got upside for 100 plus yards and 2 touchdowns. Swift is so frustrating because Hurts vultures so many of his touchdowns at the goal line. But that's not going to happen every time. And Swift, I actually think he's going to be less popular than I would have expected, just because the slate is so big and because we have all of this value. At least if we get all of this value. I mean, Edwards-Helaire and Zamir White and even Zeke Elliott, and even some other cheap guys will take ownership away from Swift. So yeah, I have quite a bit of interest in him.
I know we at RotoWire have AJ Brown projected to be the second highest owned receiver behind Tyreek Hill, and I think the matchup is the number one reason. The volume has still been there. Like he's kind of been in the Stephon Diggs zone to some degree. It's been better. He's giving you a higher floor week to week than Stephon Diggs, but it hasn't been anywhere close to where AJ Brown was through the first 8 games of the season. I mean, he was on an all-time pace. I think he ripped off 5 or 6 consecutive 120+ yard games, and has only reached 100 yards one time since midseason. Is this a buyback in spot on AJ Brown, or are you looking elsewhere in that upper tier?
Yeah, I think you could go either way. I actually don't think he'll end up too popular. Okay. I have some interest because he's one of few players on this slate that has a 35-point ceiling. I know we haven't seen it in a while, but it's just so easy for him to put up 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. At least I feel that way in a spot like this, especially if the Cardinals can push them a little. So Yeah, it's expensive to stack him and Hurts, and I think that's what will keep the ownership in check. But yeah, I have a little bit of interest.
Mm-hmm. Saints Bucks is an interesting one in the NFC South. Tampa Bay looking to maintain their lead in the division. Saints looking to stay alive, both for the division and for a wild card spot. Our total is at 42. Bucks 2.5-point favorites. We saw Tampa kind of wipe the floor with the Saints earlier this season in New Orleans. This game is down in Tampa Bay. I kind of like both sides of this one, which is not something I would typically say about an NFC South matchup, Ryan, but Tampa Bay, no team has allowed more yards to receivers. No team has allowed more passing yards to quarterbacks on the season. I think this could be a Chris Olave spot. I think he's going to be popular this weekend. I'm not playing Derek Carr, though. That's the thing. I know he's over the last couple of weeks, he's put up better fantasy point totals than you'd think. Could be another situation where I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball. Tampa Bay shuts down the run just about every week. So I think this game will be on Derek Carr. But if I'm looking for a higher price, one-off who I'd probably like to pair with a better quarterback, Chris Olave is going to be my guy, and I'm kind of willing to eat the chalk on that one.
Yep, I really like this game. Really like Olave. You said most of the stuff I was going to say. Yeah, they've given up the most points to opposing wide receivers. Tampa Bay, they've turned into one of the biggest pass funnels in the NFL. Vita Vea and company, pretty good at stopping the run. They're pretty bad at stopping the pass. So yeah, I really like Olave. Really like Rashid Shaheed. Stepped into an every down role last week. I think 85% of snaps. And, just with the home run upside he has, if he's going to see, 7-8 targets, he can easily pay off his salary. And then on the Bucs side, yeah, Baker's been great over the last month. We saw he was the first away quarterback to ever put up a perfect passer rating at Lambeau Field a couple weeks ago. He's continued to look good since then. The Saints will be without Marshawn Lattimore this week, who has had some, notable matchups with Mike Evans in the past. We've seen them fight a few times. Yeah. So, that opens things up for Evans, who's priced up even more now. I think that'll keep people off Evans, but we know he has a ceiling pretty much as high as any receiver on the slate. Probably have more interest in Godwin just because there's such a significant price difference now. And Godwin is on double-digit targets for 3 straight weeks now. He looks healthy. So, yeah, I'm with you. I have quite a bit of interest in this game. Not in Derek Carr, though, either. But, yeah, like pieces from both sides that I really like in this game.
All right, we talked Niners Commanders earlier, so we'll skip that one and hit some of the remaining games in the late window. Steelers, Seahawks, Bengals, Chiefs. Any interest in either of these two games, both with kind of medium to low totals? Pittsburgh, Seattle's at 41. Bengals, Chiefs is at 44.
Yeah, not really. I'd kind of just crossed off the Steelers and Seahawks. I could go into that game. There's options on either side that you could take a chance on, but probably I'm just going to look somewhere else. There's enough other spots. The Chiefs, that's one where I'd be, if somebody told me they're going to stack Mahomes and go for it this week, I'd say, that's fine. He's one of the best quarterbacks ever. He still has the ceiling game in him, of course. It's a pretty good matchup. I don't think I'm going to go there. I think Rashee Rice will end up being one of the most popular receivers on the slate. I think you can play Rashee Rice in cash games for sure. Like I mentioned at the start, maybe I'll take a shot on Travis Kelce just now that his salary's down, but not in love with stacking the Chiefs here.
Yeah, other than Rice, I think I'm staying away from the Chiefs. CEH, I think is going to be very, very popular to the point that I might stay away, but obviously he's appealing at that price. I'm going to be watching Najee Harris's status very closely today. Didn't practice earlier in the week, was limited yesterday. Even if he's in, I think this is a good spot for Jaylen Warren. If you're looking for a discounted running back, Seattle, game script wise, not always the team you want to target. They play slow. They're near the bottom of the league in plays per game, things like that. But over the last 5 weeks, Ryan, they have allowed 169, 136, 173, 178, and 162 rushing yards to their opponents. Now, 2 of those games came against the 49ers. 1 came against Dallas. 1 came against the Eagles. So you have to take that into account. But giving up 162 to the Titans last week. That caught my eye. So I think this could be a decent Jaylen Warren spot.
Yeah, me too. I think you broke it down perfectly. If Harris ended up being out, Warren would look like one of the better plays on the entire slate. If Harris is in, that just means nobody's going to play Warren, so it makes him a pretty good tournament play.
All right, we'll talk Chargers Broncos in a moment, but we do have some news. We were talking about the Arizona Cardinals and Hollywood Brown. Not only is Hollywood Brown not playing this week, he's going on IR, so he will be done for the remainder of the season with that heel injury. Does that change your opinion at all on Arizona? Does that open things up for any of those pass catchers?
I think it means you could take a chance on the cheap guys. Sure. They haven't done it. Like Michael Wilson, it's a pretty good matchup for him. I believe Slay is still out. And the Eagles have sort of been getting torched by the pass lately. So I don't know, they're so cheap, Wilson and Moore. I probably wouldn't get to Dortch just because he's up there at 4,200. But I don't have a problem with Wilson or Moore. I guess I think McBride I still like.
Yeah, I would lean Wilson of those two cheaper options for Arizona, but obviously I like a lot to like about Trey McBride. Chargers Broncos, perhaps the most unpredictable game on the entire slate. We have Easton Stick going up against Jarrett Stidham. We saw this number move in favor of the Chargers after the Russell Wilson benching news. It is now Broncos minus 3.5 at home, total down at 37. Understandably so. It's looking like Denver likely will not have Courtland Sutton this week. That would be massive. He has not practiced due to concussion all week. So barring, a sudden change there over the next 48 hours, it looks like he will likely miss. I'm somewhat optimistic on Denver. They've played this ultra conservative style over the middle portion of the season when they made that run and got themselves back into playoff contention. But my hope is that now that they're turning things over to Jarrett Stidham, who's not just some random backup quarterback, right? He flashed at the end of last season with the Raiders. They gave him a very high dollar contract as far as backup quarterbacks go. I think there's real interest in seeing what this guy can do. And again, my hope, I don't know if this is going to happen, but my hope is that we see a more opened up playbook for the Denver Broncos. I guess the question is, can they do that if they don't have Courtland Sutton?
I think they can. I agree with you. I have some interest here in the Broncos. I don't think their passing game can really get any worse. And Stidham proved last year that he's capable. And if Sutton was out, I'd have some interest in Judy and Mims. They look like pretty good value. Judy, especially at 5,100. I may even take a chance on Stidham in tournaments just because the combination is so cheap. Yes. You really don't need a ceiling score. You need him to get 20 points. And then if your expensive players put up ceilings, you're off and running. So I could see myself playing some guys from this game.
I kind of like Stidham too. I think if you want to go ultra cheap at quarterback and you have plenty of options to do so this week, I think that's where I would lean. I think there's a case for Jacoby Brissett second half garbage time against San Francisco. You could make a case for pretty much any of these lower price guys, but I think Stidham might actually look pretty decent for them. And like you said, Jerry Jeudy is somebody that, when I was messing around with some lineup constructions last night, I kept finding myself going back to Jerry Jeudy. I think if there's ever a time for him to have, a huge game in a meaningless spot, this would be it. The Chargers defense showed up in a way that very few expected last week against Baltimore. I don't trust them to do that again. That's not who the Chargers have been at all this season. They gave Aiden O'Connell, his best fantasy game of the year a couple of weeks ago. And obviously that one got out of hand and was, a unique structure as far as how it played out. I don't think we're getting 63 points on the board from the Denver Broncos, but if you're looking to save up big time at quarterback, I think this is about as good of a matchup as it gets for Stidham.
Yep, I'm with you.
All right, man. We have neared the conclusion of the Sunday slate. Do you have any thoughts on Packers Vikings? I know that's your team, and that's going to be a showdown slate on Sunday night. But that one to me, with Jaren Hall starting for Minnesota, all bets are off. I have no idea. I have not watched a ton of Jaren Hall during his college days. The one time we saw an extended glimpse of him, ironically, was against Green Bay earlier this season when Kirk Cousins came out and the Vikings were up 2 scores. They were just in, kind of run out the clock mode. So I don't really feel like we got a representative sample on Jaren Hall. But I have absolutely no idea how this game is going to play out. I think I lean Green Bay just because there's enough variance with Hall that, to me, more often than not, it probably goes badly rather than him showing up and looking great.
Yeah, no, I think I agree pretty much how you broke it down. I haven't seen Hall enough to really give I guess an informed opinion, but I lean Green Bay. It just seems like I think Love has been playing better for the most part the second half of the season. Packers are getting healthier, at least on offense, a little bit with Aaron Jones back, and they should have Jaden Reed back. Yeah, I don't know. Lean the Packers just against a probably pretty bad quarterback. I don't mean to slander Jaren Hall, but yeah, you think the Packers have more to play for? I don't know. I think they'll get it done.
Yeah. All right, let's talk defense real quickly, then we'll be on our way out. Any spots that you like here? Obviously, you got the 49ers at 4,200. I'll just ask you generally. I mean, how do you typically handle defense? Are you a pay up for defense guy? Are you a bargain bin guy? Where do you typically lean?
If I can, I'll go cheap. So starting for cash games, and for cash games, I'll usually just go with the cheap chalk or even the chalk in general. Like, you don't want to lose at defense. And I think this week we're going to have the Broncos as the most popular. They're 2,900 at home against Easton Stick. So I think, assuming that's the case, I'm just going to click the Broncos for cash games.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't mind taking a chance on the Colts, especially if Josh Jacobs doesn't play. You can get them at 3,200. They've been one of the better fantasy defenses this season. They've relied a ton on takeaways, but I believe last week was their first game in like 19 games that they did not have a takeaway. So it's been consistent. It dates back beyond this season. They've been an opportunistic defense. That's a spot that I think is okay. I think I would avoid the Chargers against the Broncos. I mean, they're at 2,900 as well. It feels like one of those sides is going to hit. I don't want to touch the Ravens against Miami. I don't want to touch Miami against Baltimore. If it's CJ Beathard for the Jags, I wouldn't mind Carolina at 2,700 if you really want to go deep.
Nope, I'm with you there. I see the Texans have a decent projection. I guess I get that. I guess I'll try to disagree with you for once. Could see myself taking a chance on the Ravens just because no one's really going to play them because they're going to play all these other spots at 3K and 2,900. And like you mentioned, it could be a letdown spot for either one of these teams after they were just involved in those big games. We saw how good Baltimore's defense has been. Miami's not going to have Jalen Waddle. There's a chance this game could get out of hand and they just struggle. Miami's offensive line is banged up. So yeah, I don't mind the Ravens.
I don't mind the Bears either at 3,400. Again, I don't think this is a good spot for the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, the Bears are not a defense that generates a ton of turnovers. The Falcons, when it was Desmond Ridder, they were very much turnover prone. But for a team that keeps it on the ground, I mean, if you're shooting for upside, I don't know that there's necessarily a ton there with the Bears. But I think they're a relatively safe option. I don't think that's going to be a high scoring game by any means. Other than that, I don't know if I'd go a whole lot higher. I don't think I love the Jags defense even against Carolina. And I don't think there's much upside there. I'm more like you. I tend to try to find bargains on defense. I have a tough time, investing 4,200 in a team like the Niners going up against Washington. As good of a spot as it is, I don't think the payoff tends to be as rich, when you're paying up for a defense as opposed to spending that money elsewhere.
No, I'm with you, and I'm not trying to, especially on the road, and even against a guy like Brissett. He's not like one of these quarterbacks that's going to turn it over a ton. At least I don't see it like that. I know we're running a little long. Okay, I'm just going to go rapid fire through the players who I think are going to be popular in cash games at each position, or the guys who are like in play. Quarterback, I think it's 4 guys. You can pay all the way up for Hurts. I think that's fine. You can go sort of in the middle with Purdy at 7K, or you can play Brissett or Tyrod Taylor for under 5K. I think all those guys are okay right now. I think the 3 most popular running backs, McCaffrey, pretty much a lock in cash games. There's enough value. He's going to be popular. There's enough value to afford him, and he's going to be popular. CEH would be the most popular of the value. I think you just have to click it in cash games. Zamir White too. I think he would be next. If one of those guys, or if Pacheco or Jacobs ends up playing, I think Zeke Elliott's ownership will start to climb. I think he's fine in cash games. I mentioned I'm cool with fading him in tournaments, but I wouldn't mind playing him in cash games if we don't get that other value. At receiver, I think you can spend up for Tyreek if you're punting at quarterback. And also if we get those running back punts, I don't think he's a must, but he's the spend up option I would want. Or else you're probably going down to Rashee Rice at 6,900. He'll be popular. He's been popular in cash for the last few weeks, so I don't mind going there. Zay Flowers might carry a little bit of ownership because there's no one really else in the 5K range. I think the popular punt, or one of the popular punts, will be Demario Douglas at 4,300. He just projects for the most targets in that range. So I see him with a higher projection than most in the 4K range, and he'll get some ownership in cash games because people like playing him in that format. Tight end is tougher this week. You can spend up for McBride or Kittle. I don't think it's necessary. You can pay down for Okonkwo or Gerald Everett. I kind of like landing on Dalton Schultz if you can get there. I think those are the 5 that are in play at the moment. And then, defense, it seems like Broncos are going to be chalk, so probably just click them.
All right, man. Great stuff. I appreciate the run through there. Anything else that you want to tell the listeners before we head out?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we covered quite a bit. I think with more games this week and not quite as much chalk, pick the spots that you like best and don't worry about some of the stuff that, I know it sounds easy, but sometimes you worry, you factor in more things on like a 9-game slate. Maybe like sometimes I'll fade guys that I really like just because they're going to be too popular. Maybe you want to take a chance on another spot. This week, I'm just trying to find the spots that I'm the most confident in and then attacking them.
All right, Ryan, this was awesome, man. I appreciate you letting me step in and do the show with you. This was a lot of fun. We want to thank our sponsors, Circa. Go check out circalasvegas.com. Odds are you can find their app in the iOS or the Google Play Store. And, of course, Smash Up Fantasy Sports. Go to smashupsports.com to check that out. You can find the regular Sunday morning live stream right here on our Twitter account, on the RotoWire YouTube page as well. That'll be Jim Coventry answering all of your fantasy questions, your start-sit questions heading into Week 17. If you're playing DFS this weekend, which hopefully if you're listening to this, if you're watching live, you better be playing DFS. Good luck. We'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. This was fun. Good luck, everybody.